Welcome back to the deep dive. We are really glad you're here with us today because we're doing something a little different this time.
Yeah, quite a bit different, actually.
Right. Usually, we take a stack of articles, maybe a few different authors, and we try to synthesize a broad topic. But today, we're focusing on a single massive piece of work. We are cracking open Designing Futures by Jafar Humayun.
And cracking open is definitely the right phrase because this text it's dense. It is not light reading.
No, it really isn't. And honestly, it's a little intimidating at first because usually when we talk about the future of education or, the future of work, we get stuck in these very tactical, gadget-focused conversations.
Right. It usually devolves into a discussion about tools.
Exactly. It's always, do we need more tablets in the classroom, or should every third grader learn Python, or is virtual reality the future of history class?
Yeah, we talk about tools because tools are easy to buy and they're easy to measure.
But Jafar is doing something completely different here. He is not giving us a shopping list. He's talking about a fundamental shift in how we actually use our human brains. He calls it a cognitive pivot.
A cognitive pivot.
Exactly. And reading through this, it felt less like a policy paper and more like almost like a survival guide for the human mind in a totally new environment.
I think that's a really fair assessment. And it's important to frame exactly what Designing Futures is before we get too far into the weeds here. As Jafar puts it right in the introduction, this is not a solutions manual.
Right.
It is a narrowing of the field. This series explores which futures remain structurally viable once trade-offs, incentives, and limits are taken seriously.
A narrowing of the field. That specific phrasing really stuck with me.
It's a powerful way to look at futurism, honestly.
Yeah.
He's saying, look, we aren't here to paint a utopia where everything is perfect and resources are infinite. We're here to look at the physics, the economics, the real incentives, and ask what is actually structurally viable in the new world we are entering.
So we're not talking about what we hope happens. We're talking about what can happen when you actually take the constraints seriously.
Precisely. And specifically, today we're looking at the first installment of this serialized analysis. It's episode 1, titled Rebuilding Education for the AI Age.
But do not let that title fool you.
No, please don't. This isn't just about K through 12 schools. This is about the obsolescence of a certain type of human value.
And that's the heavy part. We aren't just talking about report cards or digital literacy. We are exploring what remains for human development when information is no longer scarce, but judgment is.
That is the core thesis right there, the shift in our entire cognitive architecture.
So let's dive into that first major point from the source, the end of the knowledge premium. Because this sets the economic reality for the whole discussion.
It does. For over a century, the education system was designed around one primary function, the transfer of codified knowledge.
And codified knowledge is basically
Facts, formulas, standardized procedures, anything you can explicitly write down in a manual or a textbook. The dates of the French Revolution, the steps to balance a ledger, the periodic table.
right. And for 100 years, the deal was pretty simple. You go to school, you memorize those facts, you learn the rules, and if you did that well, you got a job.
And we have to be fair to that system. That deal worked. It built the modern middle class. But we have to understand why it worked. It worked because knowledge was scarce.
Information just wasn't everywhere.
Exactly. In the past, if you wanted to know the specific tensile strength of an alloy or case law for a specific tort, you had to go find it.
Yeah?
You had to go to the library, buy the book, or pay tuition to sit in a lecture hall and hear it from an expert.
So if you had that formula in your head and the person standing next to you didn't, you had immediate economic value.
You were a walking database. Knowing more than the next person translated directly into a premium on your salary.
But contrast that with the present reality, and this is where the obsolescence of traditional models comes in. AI systems are now trained on the world's books, manuals, and datasets.
They've effectively read the entire library.
Right, so any task that depends primarily on absorbing, recalling, or applying existing knowledge is now inherently automatable.
And that is a huge structural shift. It means the core challenge isn't about what tools to use in the classroom anymore. It is about what kinds of thinking remain valuable when knowledge itself is entirely free.
If the cost of knowing drops to zero, the value has to shift somewhere else.
It has to. And that leads perfectly into the second section of the analysis, which gets into the mechanics of this shift, procedural versus architectural cognition.
This was the most technically fascinating part for me, because it defines the specific threat AI poses to traditional thinking. Let's break those down. What is procedural cognition?
Procedural cognition is rule-based thinking. It's following a recipe. If A happens, then do B. Even if the recipe is incredibly complicated with 1,000 steps, if it can be written down, it's procedural.
So basically following the manual.
Yes, and AI absolutely dominates procedural thinking. If you can write the steps, the machine can follow them faster and more accurately than a human ever could.
Which means we need to focus on what humans can do that AI currently cannot. The text calls these non-specifiable forms of thought, meaning you can't write a perfect instruction manual for them.
Exactly. And Jafar identifies three specific non-specifiable forms of thought that make up architectural cognition. The first one is problem framing.
I love this concept because AI is great at solving a problem. You hand to it, you say, write a script to sort this database, and it does it instantly.
But it is terrible at deciding which problem actually matters in the first place.
Right. It can answer the question, but it can't ask the right question.
Think about a business struggling with low sales. An AI can crunch the numbers and tell you sales are down 10% in the specific region. But it can't look at the messy reality, the low team morale, a stale product, aggressive competitors, and frame the real issue. A human has to say, the problem isn't our marketing budget, it's our core product identity.
That's problem framing, diagnosing the patient, not just reading the thermometer.
Exactly. The second non-specifiable form is navigating ambiguity,
Operating when information is incomplete or contradictory.
which is most of real life, frankly. AI struggles when the inputs are fuzzy. It hallucinates, or it just gives you a generic pros and cons list. But a human can look at a messy, ambiguous situation and make a judgment call based on context and experience,
And the third one is systems integration,
connecting insights across completely disconnected domains.
that connecting the dots.
Right. AI sees data in silos, but real-world problems require you to see the whole web. How does a shift in a biological virus impact the economics of a supply chain, which then impacts local politics? That systems integration is deeply human.
So Humayun is describing a massive shift from following the manual to developing contextual awareness and sense-making.
Sense-making is the key term. If a task can be fully specified in advance, AI will master it. Humans are needed for interpretation and value-based decisions.
Okay, I want to ground this for you listening right now. The source applies a cognitive lens to work, categorizing human cognitive activity into 3 levels. I think you'll easily recognize these in your own day-to-day.
It's a really helpful framework for seeing the structural mismatch we're dealing with.
Level 1 is reactive or procedural.
Executing known steps and rules, reading the script, filling out the form, moving the data from column A to column B.
Level 2 is systemic.
Understanding interactions, feedback loops, and trade-offs. Knowing how the whole machine works together, not just pushing your one button.
And level 3 is paradigm shaping.
Reframing problems entirely and inventing completely new approaches.
But here is the massive structural mismatch. Our current education systems, and really most corporate training too, still devote the vast majority of instructional time to that first category, reactive and procedural.
It's incredibly ironic. Schools are focusing all their energy exactly where AI has the highest competitive advantage. We are grading students on their ability to recall facts, which is a depreciating asset.
Right, their phones can do that better than they ever will.
Exactly. And we are neglecting the systemic and paradigm-shaping levels.
Now, if you're an adult listening to this, you might be thinking, okay, the schools are behind, but I can just retrain later. I'll take a course on systemic thinking when I need it.
And that assumption is what Humayun tackles next. This is a very time-sensitive issue because of what he calls the hard-wiring reality.
This part is crucial. We like to think adults are infinitely adaptable.
We are adaptable, sure. Adults can learn a new software interface or a new tool at age 40. But fundamental patterns of reasoning, how you process complexity and make sense of the world, those are primarily shaped during childhood and adolescence.
So we're talking about a serious transitional friction here.
Massive friction.
Yeah.
It is significantly harder to rewire how someone reasons later in life. If you spend your first 18 years in a system that only rewards rote memorization and following the rules, those neural pathways become incredibly entrenched.
Your brain defaults to, just tell me the answer so I can memorize it.
Exactly. So early education becomes a decisive factor for long-term structural resilience. If we keep focusing on book-learnable tasks, students might succeed academically. They might get straight A's.
But they'll fail economically.
Yes, because their hardwired strengths are easily and cheaply replicated by machines.
That is a very sobering reality. So we know the old model is facing obsolescence. What does a viable educational future actually look like, according to Designing Futures?
Humayun outlines three specific structural shifts, which he calls the three pivots of reform,
Let's walk through those. The first pivot is thinking with information.
which means treating content as the raw material for reasoning rather than the final endpoint.
So not just memorizing the date of a historical event and stopping there.
Right. Currently, the answer is the goal. In the new model, the answer is just the starting point. You use that fact to build an argument, solve a problem, or justify a decision.
It's treating information like building blocks. The second pivot is crossing boundaries.
This is about breaking down subject silos to foster systems thinking. Real-world problems do not fit into neat 45-minute class periods.
Like climate change or public health. They aren't just science problems. They are economic problems, political problems, social problems.
Exactly. If we keep teaching subjects in total isolation, students will never learn how to integrate insights across domains.
And the third pivot is assessing process, not recall, which sounds like the hardest one to actually implement.
It is the hardest, but it's the most essential. We have to move away from rewarding the mere correctness of a memorized fact. We have to start rewarding the justification of a decision.
Because grading a multiple choice test is easy, but evaluating a student's sense-making process is hard.
It takes time. But if assessment rewards memorization, then instruction will just be memorization. If we assess the reasoning process, then technology can be used to support that thinking, rather than just replacing it.
I want to make sure we touch on a critical point Humayun raises about equity, because sometimes when people hear about critical thinking or systems integration, it gets framed as an elite luxury, something for expensive private schools.
That is a dangerous misconception. And the source addresses this directly by examining the risk of structural exclusion.
Walk us through that. How does this tie into equity?
Look at who is currently receiving the most repetitive, instruction-driven procedural education. It is often students in under-resourced schools. They are being relentlessly drilled to meet basic standardized testing metrics.
So they're essentially being trained for the most automatable roles.
Exactly. They're being set up to compete directly against AI, and that is a race they cannot win.
So a thinking-centered education is not a luxury at all.
No. It is a vital safety net against systemic displacement in an AI-driven economy. If we do not make this architectural pivot across the board, we are risking massive structural exclusion for an entire generation.
We are effectively engineering them for obsolescence if we don't change course.
That is the gravity of the situation.
So, to synthesize this entire journey today, we are moving from a world where we measure people by what they know, their ability to recall codified logic, to a world where we must measure them by how they judge, frame, and synthesize.
It really is a design audit of the human mind. The entire episode highlights that measurable friction between codified logic, which AI excels at, and contextual judgment, which humans absolutely must retain.
The only viable educational future is one that focuses heavily on what cannot simply be written down.
Right. The non-specifiable skills.
Well, this has been an incredibly deep dive into just episode 1 of Designing Futures. And before we go, we want to leave you with a specific reflective question straight from the source material, something for you to mull over.
If we stop measuring students by what they can look up, what will we finally discover about their ability to decide?
That is a profound question, and it sets us up perfectly for the next part of this series. Next time, we are going to look at a fascinating dynamic, why the AI age actually needs both rote learning and critical thinking.
It sounds contradictory, but the mechanics behind it are brilliant.
I'm really looking forward to it. Until then, stay tuned, stay curious.
Way systemic.